Hi, everyone. Welcome to 40 Minutes of Faith. My name is Barbara Cox, and I host this weekly podcast to explore God's Word and our relationship with God. Today's guest is Carrin Mahmood, and our topic is hospitality. Carrin is from St. Paul, went to college in Nebraska, taught in Michigan, and attended LCMS Lutheran schools from childhood through college. She found that the ELCA Lutheran beliefs were a better fit for her. Carrin was a Lutheran high school teacher in Michigan for several years, moved back home to Minnesota, married into a restaurant-owning family, and owned, managed, and worked in restaurants for many years, then became the director of women's ministry at a Lutheran church in the Twin Cities. She's now running a homeless shelter as part of that church and cooks a free community meal once a week. Carrin wants to continue to write and do more liturgical painting, launch a restaurant operated by our marginal siblings, such as homeless, recovering ex-con, etc. Welcome, Carrin. How are things for you today in Minnesota?
Hi, welcome. It is a little cloudy, but shaping up to be a beautiful day here.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our Bible passage today is from Hebrews chapter 13. So if you're following along in your Bible, it's towards the back of the Bible in the New Testament. And I'm going to be reading Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Remember to entertain strangers, for in doing so, some have entertained angels unaware. Carrin, has the concept of hospitality evolved for you since you were a kid?
Well, it has. I grew up in a home where there was always a place at the table for anyone who showed up, and show up they did. I lived with my grandma and grandpa, and it was nothing unusual for a family or 10 people to just pop over right around dinner time. And as an adult, I am amazed that there was never a blinked eye. We just set more places, and there's always enough food. Hot dishes stretched, and so that's what we had a lot of. And so hospitality to me always meant just welcoming. It always centered around food. And I think as an adult, it has stretched greater than that for me as I looked into the Bible and as I began to live out, what does this mean? And I left the, in air quotes, hospitality industry, which usually means hotel or food, and went to church. I thought, wouldn't it be sad if we were leaving hospitality behind as we entered the church doors?
Sure.
So one of the reasons I love St. Andrew's where I work is we operate under a system of radical hospitality. So not only is the coffee always on for whoever walks through the door, if it's the UPS guy or a parishioner or the president of the congregation, they all get treated the same. But beyond that, we wanted to make sure that anyone who's marginalized has a place to be. And that's why we've opened our community resource center and the shelters.
I love that expression, radical hospitality, and we'll be talking about that more today. I know that sometimes people think of hospitality more as, okay, I'm going to invite these certain people over to dinner to my house on a certain day at a certain time. And then wouldn't it be nice if they invited us back? They might not. And actually in the Bible, it says, don't expect that kind of reciprocity. Just do it out of generosity from your heart and don't expect to be invited back. But it seems to me like people are doing that less these days. And I don't know if it's geographic, maybe in other parts of the United States that happens more often, but I grew up with it kind of being really structured. And I have never had people just walk into my house growing up or even now. So that's really something that I'd love to look towards. Have you noticed, has hospitality shifted culturally over the years also?
Yeah, I think it's become oddly less and more formal. I mean, there was a time when you would never show up to someone's house without a hostess gift, a bottle of wine or something. And so while some people still do that, that is really on the formal end of things. Right. And I think depending on people's level of interest, whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, makes a big difference. So my oldest daughter, kids were constantly at our house. Sometimes she wasn't there, but they would just stop over and hang out with us. The other kids, not so much, or it was just a difference, in their particular friend group or the friend group's needs, maybe family needs or whatever too. So hospitality, I think, Yeah, I don't see that kind of formal dinner party. Maybe it's our socioeconomic group. We don't do that. I don't know. But we have recently, and I think it's been COVID, we've recently, now that things have opened up, said we're going to start inviting people over and be purposeful about it because I don't think people would casually stop by.
And so maybe that's something to consider just in our lives. And we'll be talking about offering hospitality also to strangers, like this Bible verse instructs us to. I did have one question, Carrin. I think I know what you mean, but I'd love to hear more detail. What is liturgical art, and how can you show hospitality through art?
Liturgical art, and I think I've titled it that because religious art seems like it should depict something from the Bible. Right. So I use liturgical because I feel like it can enhance a setting at church. It can enhance a setting in a home or somewhere else that brings you to a place of worship. So when I went to Wartburg, I did my J term looking at art in churches. And there were churches all over the board. Some had absolutely nothing. Some here in the Twin Cities are part of the Walker Art Institute. Some, their main ministry is their art.
Wow.
And so especially when I think of a church over in Minneapolis, their mission is when someone walks through our door, they will find something that looks like them. So they have a Vietnamese Madonna, and they have African art, and they have South American, all different indigenous kind of art pieces up. And to me, that was such a nice piece of hospitality. The idea that when you walk in a church, it's not just a Swedish Lutheran church, but that there's something that brings you into the presence. And that seems very hospitable to me.
I agree with you. That's really wonderful, because if I walked in somewhere and didn't see anything that was of a connection to me, then I would kind of be more striving to understand where is the connection. So visually to feel that right away.
And then it becomes more of a museum, right? You're going someplace and looking to see what they're about. And it might be very interesting to learn about a lot of Russian art, or it might be interesting to learn about a German Lutheran service, but it wouldn't necessarily be personal. So my art, I try to keep abstract as much as possible, because it's in that abstract art that people bring their own emotion and their own feelings in. And I think that's where the hospitality lies.
Do you ever have times when people create art together in a faith-based setting?
We do. I have to tell you one really funny story. I had some young women over from our congregation. I said, well, let's come together and paint and dream, because we were talking about how worship is going to look different now. And so at the end of the night, they were so excited. They said, we thought we were just going to watch you paint. And I'm like, well, that'd be the worst invitation in the world. And you still came? Because that was just funny to me that anyone would just come and watch me paint. But so I think there's a place for that creative spirit when we invite people in. My favorite part of the creation story is God said, let there be light, there was light. And God said, let there be animals, and the separation. And then at the end, God said, let us create humans. And so I feel like right from the beginning, there was a change, and we were invited into that creative process because there was an us involved.
I get the feeling that you welcome all different kinds of creativity. So it doesn't have to be, here's this painting from this famous person, now you copy it and make it look just as close as you can to how this famous person envisioned it. No, I hear you saying anyone can be creative. Doesn't matter how old you are or if you've ever had any art lessons or anything like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's the process. For me, putting a blank canvas is so exciting to be able to put color on that canvas. And some people really want a lot of instruction when they do that. Everyone wants to be happy with their final product. So you need to work on that in a way that makes you happy. And for some, it's give me paint by numbers so I can really make it look like what it's supposed to. And other people want that freedom.
I know that that's not technically sort of pure hospitality as we've often thought of it, but what if hospitality can include welcoming different gifts that people have that they might not think that they had? So I know
Exactly.
We have different aspects of hospitality to talk about too. And it sounds like you have a special cooking ministry, if you will. You have a program that helps people who are
We
either homeless?
do.
Tell me more about that.
So about 6, maybe 7 years ago now, everything's a year longer than I think it is because of COVID. Nothing happened in that year.
The year that wasn't.
Yeah. We had a cook that left St. Andrews, and I said, I'll step in the short term until we can find someone. And we did soup lunches during Lent and a few other things. And then they asked if I would stay on. And I said, yes, but I have a big requirement, and that's that it becomes a ministry. Otherwise, I could go work in a restaurant again. So the kitchen needs to be open to other people, and it needs to be a ministry. So our Thursday night dinner, we feed about 120 people. Pre-COVID times, we're just opening again and slowly ramping that up, starting with about 30, 40 people. But on the day before, there's teams of people that come in, 6 to 8 to 12, much like my grandmother's home. I plan for 6 people each week, and sometimes there's 12. And then you adjust the menu so that there's enough to do for everyone who shows up to work. But in that kitchen, magic happens, and hospitality, and those people who come on a rotating basis really have formed a small group and a ministry with each other. They take care of each other. They send cards when someone's sick. They bring food to each other's homes if someone needs it. A lot of conversation. We pray. We hear about each other's lives. And there's just something about having a knife in your hand, chopping or stirring some soup that's, again, around a table. And I think, to me, it's communion. It is a way of sharing at a table, whether you're the one preparing or knowing then that it's going to be handed off to a group of people who really need the food. But more importantly, they need the community. And that's why our community meal is a little different. We do ask parishioners to show up and people in the community, not just who need a meal, because then you always have a group of people who are in the same circumstances sitting together.
Yeah, it changes the power dynamic. If it's like, oh, we're helping these people. That's not what we're saying.
But if you're sitting next to someone who owns a car dealership and you need a car, and then there's again, more of that hospitality because people are there helping each other out. And sometimes you are being blessed and sometimes you are needing the blessing. So
that's right. It's not always the same people who are the ones giving and the ones receiving. I love that you talk about both the spiritual aspect of this ministry as well as the practical aspect, because I imagine feeding 120 people in one day, you have experience in restaurant work. So that's a huge amount of prep work. I can't even imagine. So that's wonderful that the helpers who come the day before and do a lot of the prep work have formed this small group ministry, even though it's different people, like you said, on a rotating basis.
Yeah. And there's a core group of about 5 or 6 that come every week.
Wow.
Because they sign up for the whole year as fast as they can, because that's just what they do on Wednesdays. They want to be there. And then others rotate in. And I'm always so happy because that core group has gotten so tight, how generous they are with their time and their laughter, and how inclusive they are with the people who rotate in and aren't necessarily part of that smaller group, because sometimes that can be a little intimidating for people walking into a space that's occupied by people who've known each other for a long time.
Yeah, you don't want to click where the people all will know each other and talk about stuff that you have no idea what it is. And one of the practical questions that I just thought of, if you don't mind, is how is something like a meal for 120 people paid for?
We have Second Harvest here in town. They are a food bank for food shelves and for programs like ours. So that's one of our main resources. And then gifts of the congregation. We can't, because we use Second Harvest, ask for any money at the meal. And we had decided anyway, not even a free will offering. Mm-hmm. Because even then, if one person is putting in, the next one feels bad.
Right.
So we want that meal to be totally just a gift from us. And from the congregation, and it's just worked out so far. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a little like working on Chopped, because I never know what's going to be available.
You open the basket and you're like, oh, look.
We've got 40 pounds of pork. Huh.
That's what's for dinner.
Yeah.
Except for the vegetarians or anyone
Yep.
for a faith reason that doesn't want the pork, keep it separate.
Yeah. So
How
we always
interesting.
have a big green salad. We have homemade bread, homemade salad dressing. We have linens on the table when they come in. So it feels hospitable. It would be what you do when you invite guests into your home.
Mm-hmm. And I also appreciate the invitation to challenge ourselves to maybe stretch beyond what's comfortable. And I'm wondering if you have some either best practices to share in terms of this ministry or other thoughts about how to not do hospitality, even without realizing that it might not be the greatest idea. Is there any intrinsic bias that might come into play without us even realizing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that you're not doing this for someone, you're doing it with people. That we are opening our doors to include you into our family or to invite you in, even if it's just for a short amount of time. I'm not doing this for those poor people. I think it's the attitude. And what I'm so happy to see every week, people approach this with such joy, and to be the hands and feet of Christ when you do a project can be tempting to be above the people that you're helping. Yeah, so that's interesting to keep it kind of at a level where you're inclusive. The meal you're serving today, you might need tomorrow. I kind of always keep that in my heart, that we're a paycheck or two away from being a family that needs to eat a nice free meal somewhere. And the same with the shelter here. When people are invited to volunteer at our shelter, it's sometimes kind of a hard sell. I think when they hear homeless shelter, they think of a brick building with a guy sitting with a needle in his arm out back or something. It's interesting to me to see the fear in their eyes. And then they come here and we educate. That's part of our mission, to educate people on homelessness. And it's just families. It's families who, for one reason or another, don't have a home right now. And they need a little bit of help. And they can stay here and work towards getting that. And there's things you have to set aside, but a lot of ideas that pop up about what you think it is.
And first of all, we're equally at risk, even though we may have had different types of benefit. We may feel like, well, I've got money in the bank or something like that. But it's not just those people, and not everyone who's homeless uses drugs, and not everyone who's homeless is violent or has mental health issues. So I just am so grateful that you provide some training. And when you introduce people to each other, we can see that we're all God's children. And yes, maybe there's a way that your particular faith congregation can provide programmatic support to help people get back on their feet, but that it's also showing God's love and not being judgmental.
And this is a program. When people come in, we say you're at point A. To be housed, you need to get to point B. And then we support that through job searches, housing searches, resume building, interview techniques. We have a free clothing store, which is really funny. I always want to tell people, stop donating your suits to free clothing stores, because very few people at all in the world, but especially very few people who are going to a free clothing store are going to have the kind of job where they need to wear a suit. Business casual is way more likely, or solid work clothes.
Absolutely. Practical tips are welcome. I just read an article in the newspaper yesterday, unfortunately, from one of the clothing donation ministries here in town. And they said, actually the opposite of what you said, but they said, if it's really worn down and tattered, if it's basically fit to be a rag to clean something in your house, then please don't donate it. The article said they got a bag full of mismatched shoes, and they're like, well, who are we going to give these to? In that case, please just take them to the dump. Don't give them to us, because we have to pay to have all of this trash removed.
Yeah, either end. We've learned nobody wants business suits and nobody wants China anymore. There's nowhere to get rid of your China.
So I'm curious about the Bible verse. What does it mean to you about that we may be entertaining angels when we're instructed to provide hospitality?
The first time I heard this verse, I was very shocked it wasn't from the Old Testament, because I assumed it was centered around Abraham entertaining the three men in the desert, who then turned out to be angels.
That's right.
Even though it might be referencing back to that,
it's in the New Testament.
I was always intrigued by the literalness of it. I thought, oh, we could invite someone in and it could be an angel. And while I think that is still a possibility, you wouldn't want to be the person who turned the angel out to the street. I think as my ministry has grown and as I have become more involved, to me, it is seeing the angelic in all those you serve, the angelic in all those you invite in or should be inviting in. And why would we want to turn anyone away that we could possibly help? Because they're God's children. And so if not literal angels, after we feed people, I never see wings pop out, but there's still just that rush of satisfaction that somewhere you're hearing, well done, good and faithful servant, that you've entertained.
Yes. So on the one hand, seeing everyone as an angel, and then on the other hand, Carrin, I also know from my years of being a social worker that there might be times when limits do need to be set for safety reasons. So I just wanted to check in with you that absolutely see everyone as an angel, but I'm guessing that you probably have to have some situations where you say, in order to keep the most number of people safe, we do have to have a few practices in place, even if it might be kind of awkward or difficult to set that limit.
Yeah, of course. And I'm thinking specifically at the shelter, we are run mostly by volunteers. We have 13 churches that have people either staying overnight or serving our evening meal. Most of those volunteers are retired folks.
Okay.
And so when we decide who comes into the shelter, we're a family shelter because that's where the gap was in our county.
That's right.
We are the only family shelters in our county. So it has to involve children. Yep. And we do background checks. There can't be a violent history. There can't be a felony with any sort of violence. And we've also said we aren't taking moms from a domestic violence situation. Yeah. Because there are some really good DV shelters around for them that are safe. And we don't have that level of security. We don't have that level of privacy. With 13 churches, everyone knows where we are. So it wouldn't be safe for the guests or the volunteers. It's the world we live in that we do have to make some choices that aren't always easy. Luckily, Minnesota is a state with great resources. So usually we can offer them some ideas and some resources for them to go to.
I like to ask if there's an elephant in the room around this topic of hospitality or serving our siblings when it comes to meals or homelessness. Is there something that's kind of awkward to talk about that we can maybe discuss and dig into a little bit around this theme?
Yeah, I think two elephants. One is the color elephant. I think people assume that most people are people of color. So let's just jump on that for a little bit. So a lot of our guests are Indigenous or people of color, but we also have a handful of Caucasian people too. So it's kind of the grapes and raisins thing. You know, it's not all people of color are homeless. You can dance around it to the point where you don't even want to mention it. And yet then you're also not being very hospitable. So what kind of foods are you serving? What things that are not, as someone who grew up in a very Swedish white family, little things like volume. Volume of our family was very low. We were all very soft-spoken. It's what you did. For our homeless people, it's very different. It's just up here instead of down here with volume. And that can put people off until you realize, yeah, they need to yell. They need to be heard. And volume is one of the ways that happens. So you dig into that a little bit. Well, they always sound so sassy. And I'm like, yep. And if you were fighting for your kids and you were hungry all the time, you would be sassy too. You need to do that too.
So sort of cultural expectations. It's not fair to say I'm most comfortable with people who are just like me. Okay, but who's that helping?
Exactly. Yeah. And so I grew up with this beautifully hospitable family, nice white lady who wants to help everybody. We did a survey with our church and I got it back and it said that I had this huge amount of prejudice, although I didn't think I had any. And the poor guy who was administering, and I burst into tears. And I'm like, what? I'm a horrible person. And he's like, no, no, no. It's just that you have intrinsic biases. I'm like, I'm not biased. I'm not racist. I was just distraught. And then, to be honest, George Floyd happened here.
Yes.
And when I sat and watched that murder, I thought, oh, I get it. I get what you've been trying to say that I could not see at all. And it made me really sad, obviously, for the moment at hand, but also we have been yelling and saying that things are different for us, and you did not hear. And I sure didn't. And to be intrinsically biased makes you feel like you've purposefully done something wrong. Mm-hmm. But the intrinsic part, I just realized, of course I'm biased. It's what I saw or allowed myself to see. Mm-hmm. And when you know better, you do better. The old Oprah saying from 20 years ago. So yeah, it was time to ask some questions and to look outside of what I knew, and to at least be able to say, yeah, that's a whole different experience than I have. And the way they react is different than I would, because they grew up differently than I did. They have a different set of tools than I have. And maybe my set of tools isn't right. Let's look at that too. So our community resource center team, there's 6 of us on staff. And so it's been an interesting journey, and we've been spending some time learning, which is always fun.
I really appreciate that, Carrin, because I wouldn't have thought of you as a racist person, neither myself. But what is this bias that we might be carrying around, first, without even realizing it, and then second of all, being open to learning? And just one practical example, I want to follow up with you. Can you say a little bit more about particular kinds of food maybe showing welcome or understanding?
Yeah, so one just super simple example is having a bottle of hot sauce out. So for our family, having ketchup out is about as spicy as we get.
I didn't have garlic until I went to college. I didn't even know what it was. And now I put it in everything.
Yeah. So having, the rooster sauce, the sriracha out. So many of our families like things way hotter than the Scandinavian Germanic menu would have. So I did our family favorite chow mein hot dish, and I saw someone putting hot sauce on it. And I'm like, what are you doing? And then I'm like, I would put salt on something, so it's just those little things that you don't think about. And then saying, what do you like? So it's as simple as that. I don't have to think of everything. I don't have to be the expert on everything, because the experts are in front of me, and I just have to be open to suggestions.
I can't tolerate hot sauce. It's just embarrassing to admit, but I do know people that have it on literally everything, and that's okay too.
Yeah. They use hot sauce and ranch are always sitting out, because evidently ranch is good on everything, even cereal. Yes. So who knew?
Thank you. You had mentioned 2 elephants, but I think so far we've only talked about one.
One is color, and the other is intelligence.
Okay.
That people think intelligence is equated with lack of income or
success on the other side.
Or success, or being stuck in a situation. Mm-hmm. And that's so far from the truth. Anything can happen to anyone at any time. And starting there, I think, is really a good spot when you're working with people who need some help. Start with the idea that they know some stuff. Not that you're going to come down and also they need some help. Navigating systems is really hard unless you do it. I've been in a DMV in a new state where things were different than where I got my license in the old state, and you feel dumb. Right. And that's just getting a driver's license. So navigating governmental things especially can be really hard. And being an advocate for people is so important.
And there are also different kinds of intelligences and different types of situations that might set someone, quote, behind. So for example, for me, reading came easily. I can devour books. And I know for some folks, reading is just plain old difficult, which is going to make school that much more difficult in terms of advancing through the grades and doing lots of reading and taking written exams. I have mild dyslexia, so math was always a challenge for me. So I can't even imagine for someone with more severe dyslexia or other types of neurological processing type issues, even reading with glasses. Can you see the chalkboard? Well, I don't know if anybody uses chalkboards anymore, but I guess that goes to speak to my age. But I got glasses in elementary school. And so how is your vision? How is your hearing? So medical access, health insurance, there's huge systemic situations that I could go on a soapbox for a really long time about that. So starting off at the very youngest ages, are you sitting in your classroom on an empty stomach? Were you able to get sleep at night? How's the home situation? And that has nothing to do with intelligence in terms of how are you getting through your school day at the very youngest, and then needing to work and having physical intelligence that I really don't have very much coordination in terms of sports. So people used to, in the olden days, I don't know if they do anymore, some people looked down on, say, a vocational training. But does everybody have to go to college? Sometimes people are making more money after they complete a vocational training than someone who has a bachelor's degree and graduates with tons of debt and then needs to go on for even more education.
Yeah. The other prejudice that people have, or bias, is that there's a laziness. And I have found the opposite to be true. Our families work, they work really hard. We have a lot of moms who are CNAs, and it just doesn't make a livable wage. They can't afford childcare if they're doing that, or rent here is really high. So a one bedroom is about $1,200 a month.
Oh gosh.
In the Twin Cities, it's very, very high.
And for some people, that's a mortgage, but then that comes from a different place. Again, do you have that bank account and that income that you'll even get the mortgage? Yep. And minimum wage is not enough. People have to work 2-3 jobs on minimum wage. And then, like you said, childcare or even transportation. Are you taking a bus back and forth? Is your transportation time that much longer to get from job to job?
Yeah. So laziness typically isn't an issue. There are some mental health issues that are not confined to low income. I mean, it's the same mental health issues throughout the spectrum,
of course.
But when you have some funds and a good health insurance policy, you can deal with some of those things more easily. So.
Yeah, and access to both a counselor as well as not only the health insurance, like you mentioned, but medication. And that made me think, when you're really prioritizing $1,200 a month in rent for a one bedroom and food, and do you need to buy a bus pass or your car? And then what's left in terms of clothing? It's cold where you are, so people need winter gear. And then you're taking a look at, okay, what's my copay? Do I have a deductible? Things like that. So how do you prioritize your expenses when it comes to what you need and what the family needs?
There's a really fun game we play with volunteers with Jenga. And on each block, we write a different, got sick, $500, or, and then you put, need electricity. And so as you pull those things out of the tower, how easily it can fall with just a few things coming out of your monthly stack.
I love that you're showing some of the practical things, because when I have pain in a certain body part and my doctor says, well, you need to go get the scan or something, I say, okay, fine, I'll get the scan. I'm worried. What is this pain that I'm having? And then you get the bill after the scan and you're like, gosh, I thought I had a good insurance, but I have this deductible, I have this copay, and I have a savings account. So I don't need these people calling me, chasing me down for this money, and then eventually charging interest. So thank you for sharing some of those realities to train the volunteers. It can be really overwhelming.
Yeah.
Or then you just don't get the scan. Yeah.
And you just use the emergency room as your doctor, because emergency rooms have to take you in.
Is there any other voice that's missing in this conversation about radical hospitality? And you have an example of faith-based groups helping a certain subset of the population, but who can we be listening to? Who can we make an effort to really hear more?
I think just the act of listening is key. I think we form ideas, we watch the news, we've already picked sides, who's right and who's wrong. One exercise that we've all been doing is set that aside and listen to something you wouldn't normally hear. So, okay, that person's really irritating, they're really loud, I'm losing their message because I don't like the presentation. Make an effort to drop that and hear what they're saying. We've had the same conversation a million times. I know what my cousin is going to put on Facebook, try to get down to what they're saying. What is their fear? What is their reason for doing that? I think we just need to listen to someone we wouldn't listen to normally and try to hear what they're saying. We need to see it with fresh eyes. And then we don't always have to have an answer or a comeback, which is the hard part for me. Yeah. The waiting and then saying, but did you think of it this way? How about I just think about it for a while?
Do I always have to be right? Do I always have to be educating somebody else?
Yeah, exactly. And then I've been trying to answer people that I disagree with this line. I am so happy that we disagree, because a place where everyone agrees is run by the Taliban, is run by the Nazis, is run by Stalin. Mm-hmm. A place where everyone has the exact same idea is really dangerous. So I don't agree with you, but I'm happy we don't, because we need these ideas and it makes both of us think. And even if I'm not convinced, it makes other people think. At least maybe you can embarrass them into it, or at least encourage them to, okay, I'm going to think about this. Would you too? But there has to start to be some listening, and not just listening, but really hearing and digging.
I agree. And I might not be right. Imagine that. I might have something to learn in this, or to see it from a new perspective, or to imagine I haven't had this problem and someone's dealing with it in a really creative way as best that they can. So even if I might think this one way is better, it might not be. It might not be applicable.
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
I know we get the Nike argument, because people will often say, well, that family, all their kids have Nikes. And I can't afford Nikes for my kids, so how poor could they be? And we just laugh because, yep, they had an extra $200. It's not enough for rent. It's not enough for insurance. It's not enough for a car payment, but they can give their child something that other kids have and some enjoyment for something really cool. It was their one extravagance.
So letting go of judgment to say, well, they have something fancy, to say, not my decisions are always right and your decisions are always wrong.
Yeah. It's just a different system.
And my family was very frugal. And in the end, I can see the benefit of those lessons. But I was sad when I was a kid because we had clothes from Bradley's and Kmart, and there's nothing wrong with those clothes, but they weren't fashionable. So I was out. But how sad is it that kids and even grownups to a certain extent judge each other on, is your stuff fashionable or not? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Are you covered?
Exactly. Are you safe and warm, whether it's fashionable or not?
Yeah.
Do you have any other resources that you can think of, Carrin, that you'd like to share that folks can take a look at on their own? And we'll also have them on the 40minutesoffaith.com website.
Yeah, there is. It's 13th. It's about a 3-hour documentary.
Okay.
But it's really, really good on just seeing how we went from being a country that had slave ownership as a legal possibility to where we are today, and how that journey went just legally. But it's really, really fascinating. And there's other books and a list of things.
That's great. I can attach them all. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you and to all your listeners out there, and that we don't see, but we know are listening.
Dear Heavenly Father, we kneel before you with deep gratitude for everything you have blessed us with, for the experience of life, and to be used by you so others can see your greatness. We know many suffer in the world, and many turn their eyes of truth away from it. We ask you to help us to see all people and situations the way you do. Help us to have eyes like Jesus, with true compassion and no judgment. May our hands be open to those who are lacking and in need. May we fill their lives with goodness you fill with ours. Teach us how to love others as you love us, and may that include loving ourselves more also. Forgive us when we have turned away or shunned others by what they don't have. Heal us so we can be in your likeness and help heal the world and the less fortunate. Soften our hearts and open our minds. Guide us to be a unity like you created us to be. In your holy name we praise you. Amen.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver Thine is the kingdom, thine is the power, thine is the glory.